14 children were born in this Icelandic farmhouse between 1853 and 1875. They were the offspring of Vilborg Jonsdottir and Thorwaldur Stigson, who had inherited the farm from Vilborg's parents. The setting was beautiful, overlooking a small fjord with mountains in the background. The volcanic soil was very shallow, however, and the farming was pretty much limited to the raising of sheep. The name of the farm was Keldiskogur, meaning marshy woods, but we didn't see any marshy woods when we were there in 1972. By we, I mean Wally Thorwaldson and me, both of whose grandfathers were among the 14 children born at Keldiskogur. Wally and I are shown here with the current farmer and an interpreter. The little lady volunteered to interpret for us because she had taught English many years before, but we would really have welcomed an interpreter for our interpreter. My wife Betty got to know one of the farmer's sons and two of his woolly friends. The boy was about the same age as some of our grandfathers and granduncles were when they left Iceland for the U.S. They were a glum-looking group when they posed for this photo in 1881, shortly before heading for America. They had good reason to be glum. Their father had recently died. They were leaving friends and relatives that they would probably never see again, and they were going to a strange land where people spoke a strange language. The taller young man at the right rear is Stigr, the oldest son and Wally's grandfather, who had taken over the major family responsibilities when his father went to Copenhagen to be treated for stomach cancer and died there. Stigr was 28 when this picture was taken, and my grandfather Ellis, on the far right and the next oldest, was 14. The reason for the large age difference was that the 5 children in between had all died very young. Their father Thorwaldur had left much of the care of their sheep to oldest son Stigr, while Thorwaldur augmented the family income by practicing a number of crafts, such as carpentry, tool making, and bookbinding. He even built the community church, shown here in a photo taken during our visit in 1972. It is still in good shape about 100 years after it was built. The interior is quite nice, though very small. It's currently being used on a regular basis. Wally and I were excited to see the name Thorwaldur Stigson shown on the worship board as the builder of the church. Some Icelanders had preceded our family to North Dakota because of great damage done by a volcanic eruption in Iceland in 1875. The prime motivation for the Thorwaldsons, however, seemed to be that Stigr was very much in love with a young lady whose family had gone to America in 1875, and Stigr had promised to follow soon. He had planned to go to Copenhagen to learn fine carpentry and then go on to America to claim his bride. His father's death upset these plans, however, and he felt obligated to stay with his family until they were able to get along without him. He thought that he had reached this point when Ellis was 14 and a hired man had agreed to help with the farm. When it came time for Stigr to leave, however, his mother became very fearful and asked that he take the whole family with him. He couldn't refuse, and they sold the farm, its animals and equipment, and all embarked for North America. When they arrived in the Dakota Territory, they were overjoyed to find that Stigr's beloved Thorin had faithfully waited for 6 years, and she and Stigr were soon married. The first few years on the U.S. prairie were rough going. This is a photo of Stiger and Thorin's first home. At that point in history, both the U.S. and Canada had homestead laws that in effect gave 160 acres of free land to anyone who agreed to build a home or farm the property. It was thought that Icelanders would easily adapt to the northern areas, but it turned out that Dakota winters were much more severe than anything they had experienced in Iceland. Stiger first applied for homesteads for himself and his mother, but when he went to finish the improvements on his mother's homestead, he found two men with guns saying they were living there and planned to stay. Stiger decided to look elsewhere. He purchased this cabin and 40 acres of land for $800. He paid $400 cash and $400 on a mortgage that took several years to pay off. It provided a home for the whole family until some of the brothers drifted off to work elsewhere. In this photo, the family is dressed in its Sunday best. If you look closely, you can see Stiger sitting in the doorway, wearing a white tie. The picture was much different in winter, which was particularly hard on the girls. All three of the sisters died within the first 3 years. An interesting keepsake of these times is this letter written in 1888 by Ellis to Stiger. Ellis had gone to Seattle to scout out opportunities there and describes the situation in his letter. He worked at several jobs, like putting in sidewalks and driving one of the new electric streetcars. After about 2 years, however, he decided he'd rather be in North Dakota, near Icelandic friends and relatives. This photo of the 5 brothers was taken in 1893, 12 years after their arrival in America. Ellis is at far left and Stiger at right rear. By this time, Stiger had added a general store and post office to his farming activities. This photo is a giant leap forward, about 40 years, to the time when Stiger and Thorin, along with most of their 4 sons and 4 daughters, had moved to California. Stiger and Thorin were in the center, front and rear. To Thorin's right is Olivia Paulina, known as Polly to one and all, who gradually became the family matriarch and historian. In another jump forward in time, this is Polly's family after she married Egil Shield. His parents had also been born in Iceland, and their name was Skjöld before being translated to Shield. The 3 Shield sons are John at top left and Ted at Thor at top right. Daughter Sigrid is to the left of Polly. The remainder are spouses and grandchildren. Sigrid was taken over from Polly as family historian and has been a great help in putting together this video presentation. While Stiger had been busy raising his family, Ellis had also. Here he is shown about 1910 with his 4 sons and 2 daughters gathered around him. Octavia is top center and Alvin is sitting on his father's knee. Ellis apparently had an innate business sense, and his expression of this began when he saw this ad in the Icelandic newspaper published in Winnipeg. It was placed in the paper on April 21, 1892 by L. Gudmundsson and read in Icelandic, "I have for the past few years run a store here in Mountain, North Dakota, but now anyone has the opportunity to buy me out because I want to sell and will accept any offer presented to me. Come quick, fair sale, good terms." Ellis accepted this good offer and purchased this store that he operated for the next 35 years. From its proceeds, he was able to buy several farms and send 6 children away to boarding school. There was no high school anywhere near Mountain, and 2 North Dakota University, plus 1 to law school, 1 to medical school, and 1 to nursing school. He started out as a very dapper young man, courting a local school teacher. Her name was Hallfrida Snowfield, and at different times she was known as Frida and Hattie. She was the first Icelandic woman to graduate from a university, and used this card to remind new acquaintances that they had met someone special. Ellis's card, used when he was running for Pembina County Treasurer, was a bit more conservative. Here are Ellis and Hattie on their wedding day, and Ellis on a cold North Dakota day. This is the home they built in Mountain and where all their children were born and raised, and the church where they were all baptized. Their firstborn was Wilmer, followed 16 months later by the twins, Elizabeth Thorbjörg and Octavia Serbjörg. Ellis used to embarrass Frida by telling people they had been married 2 years and had 3 children. Elizabeth was always Beth, and Octavia was Tavia and Topsy. Next came Sidney and Alfred, and then Elvin, the baby of the family. Obviously dressed up to impress the neighbors, the kids don't look too happy about the whole thing. This photo was taken before Elvin had arrived on the scene. And speaking of impressing the neighbors, Ellis here shows off the first automobile in Mountain, a 1909 Ford. Sitting beside him is 13-year-old Octavia. Although Ellis and Frida were very strict parents, the kids managed to have a little fun. This photo is labeled the famous trio, Sidney, Wilmer, and Alfred. And here Topsy acts out a rooftop escape from her college dorm. The twins seem to have posed for an annual photo, this one with Wilmer. Basketball was the North Dakota sport because it could be played indoors in cold weather. Wilmer was a top player at North Dakota University. He often played on the same team as Sidney. Alfred, on the right, was a bit younger. The twins have now become young debutantes. Both tried their hand at teaching, and here is Octavia in her one-room schoolhouse. Beth decided she would prefer nursing and went to Chicago to attend the same medical school where Wilmer received his doctor's degree. Here they are on a Chicago beach with a couple of friends. The Thorwaldsons and Brandsons were joined when Octavia Thorwaldson married Einar Brandson. The Brandson lineage can be traced back to 1795, when Sturluger Einarsson was born. He was my great-great-grandfather, and legend has it that he was called Sturluger the Rich because of his habit of carrying silver coins in his mittens to distribute to those who were less fortunate. His son Gudbrandur farmed in the area called Valley of the White River and was the father of my grandmother, Margaret. In 1872, Margaret married John Brandson. John and Margaret worked on Gudbrandur's farm until they could afford a farm of their own. Then in 1878, they sold their farm and emigrated to Minnesota. In 1880, they traveled by ox cart to Garter, North Dakota, where they acquired farmland and spent the rest of their lives. Margaret died in 1900, John in 1921. The cousin of John Brandson's, Haraldur Bolvarsson, became the family's most illustrious member when he started a fish processing company that became the largest in Iceland. During our 1972 trip to Iceland, We visited the processing plant and enjoyed a very posh fresh salmon luncheon with the current family. And here is the family of John and Margaret Brandson, with my father Einar at the left at about age 10. Young Einar had trouble deciding between farming and business until he met Octavia, whose father Ellis was a strong believer in business. Einar went to business school and became manager of the bank that Ellis had started in Mountain. Here are Einar and Octavia on their wedding day, posing in Ellis's front yard. Here Octavia is showing off her wedding bouquet to Sister Beth and their two closest girlhood friends. In this group photo on wedding day, John Brandson is at the left and Brandr Brandson is the large man to the right. Brandr was my father Einar's brother and was a doctor in Winnipeg, always known as Dr. Brandson. Some idea of his stature in the Icelandic community can be obtained from this newspaper article with the heading, Centenary of a Great Man's Birth. It starts out, June the 1st marked the centenary of the most outstanding Icelander of the Western world, and it would be well to recall the imprint of his life on our lives, and to remember his excellence, his character, and his charity. The article goes on to cite his accomplishments both in medicine and in Icelandic community affairs, saying, quote, he was a link between the pioneer hardships of the early Icelanders and the stable continuity of the Icelandic community of today, close quote. In 1922, there was a blessed event. Robert Ellis Brandson was born in a Winnipeg hospital and arrived in Mountain shortly thereafter. His uncle Elvin had just dropped out of medical school in Winnipeg and was home to play with him. And Avi Ellis enjoyed his company, as did Amma Frida. And here he is ready for a North Dakota winter. This is the last known photo of Ellis. He and his wife Frida are standing in their yard with three of their children and only grandchild. From left to right are Beth, Elvin, Sidney, and Robert Ellis. During the next 4 years, Ellis's family suffered a series of tragic body blows. First, Ellis's eldest son Wilmer drowned in an abandoned quarry pool near Chicago shortly after graduating from medical school. Wilmer was a strong swimmer, so the best guess about what happened was that he was hit by a heart attack. A few months later, the bank in Mountain that was started by Ellis and managed by my father Einar went bankrupt. Einar felt disgraced and left for Portland, Oregon to start a new life. I was about 3 years old at the time and never saw him again. Soon after that, Ellis's store in Mountain burned down with all its contents. Ellis's brother Horace had gone to California and was a sheriff and prohibition agent in the Fresno area. In 1927, he was killed in an automobile accident that appeared to have been caused by someone running him off the road. 2 weeks earlier, he had attended their elder brother Stiger's funeral in Los Angeles, where Stiger had succumbed to stomach cancer. Another few months and Ellis himself died. This newspaper obituary reads in part, Pembina County lost one of its leading citizens on Sunday when death claimed Ellis Thorwaldson, merchant and postmaster at Mountain. He was a leader among men. He took the initiative in all civil matters. The church and school also engrossed his attention. There was not a public question affecting the community that did not find him a champion. He was a born fighter and never knew the middle ground and never compromised. Courage combined with absolute honesty and integrity made him an outstanding figure. Last January, Mr. Thorwaldson, who always was a strong and active man, was taken ill with some spinal trouble, which at first was believed to be merely an attack of rheumatism. After having been bedridden for several weeks, he went to Winnipeg, where the case was given extreme examination and diagnosis. It then developed that he had cancer of the spine. He returned home to await death that was a welcome relief after suffering almost unbelievable agony for about 9 months. Ellis's death left his wife Frida, my mother Octavia, and me pretty much out in the cold. Our savior was Mike Hjalmarsson. Mike was a North Dakota Icelander who studied engineering at the University of North Dakota. After graduation, he went to California, where he soon built a reputation as an especially capable engineer. He was put in charge of construction of the El Cortez Hotel in San Diego. It was at this point that he married my Aunt Beth, and she moved to San Diego. Soon after that, Ellis became bedridden, and she returned to Mountain to nurse him, assisted by my mother Octavia. After Ellis's death, Mike also came to Mountain, closed out Ellis's affairs there, and piled Beth, Frida, Tavia, and me into his car and drove back to San Diego. On the way, we stopped in Exeter, a small town in the San Joaquin Valley. Ellis's youngest brother Swain had moved there and was involved with the growing of grapes and oranges. There was another Ellis Brandson there, the son of my grandfather's brother Horace. He is pictured here with my Aunt Beth and me. In an effort to be hospitable, he offered to drive us up to the snow that we could see in the nearby Sierra Nevada mountains. My ungracious retort was to say in Icelandic, "I came to California to see no snow." And that's the way it was.